In 2024, the streets of Nepal erupted. Outrage over a government ban on social media escalated into a massive movement that shut down an international airport, set infrastructure on fire, and forced a prime minister to resign. 22 people died in the process. Viewing raw footage of riots and burning buildings leads to a rapid, intuitive judgment. It is easy to assume the people throwing the stones are inherently violent, reckless, or radicalized. Real-world crowds are engineered from ordinary people, one psychological layer at a time. The shift from a peaceful citizen to a member of a destructive mob is a predictable biological process. Ram moved to Kathmandu from a remote village in western Nepal to pursue an education. Like many in Gen Z, he watched the news of political corruption and the sudden ban on digital platforms with growing, quiet frustration. He lives a life of calculated choices, constantly weighing the cost of a new textbook against his monthly rent. With his family's expectations and the pressure to migrate abroad for work, Ram is a disciplined, logical actor. He explicitly rejects the idea of burning public property. Bikram is a state police officer and a father of two. He budgets every rupee of his salary for his children's school fees and family medicine. His professional training emphasizes restraint, discipline, and the absolute minimum use of force required to maintain order. Both of these men condemn violence. Both are deeply empathetic. Yet, on the day of the protests, they are converging on the exact same street, entering an environment where the sheer density of the crowd begins to override their individual logic. As Ram approaches the protest and Bikram takes his position behind a riot shield, the noise of the street swells. Ram looks at the police line and sees the faceless enforcer of a corrupt system. Bikram looks back and identifies a physical threat to public order. This environment triggers de-individuation, a psychological process where the individual I dissolves into a collective we. In a dense group, human beings stop feeling like separate entities. Ram finds anonymity inside the moving mass of thousands. Bikram's individual identity is swallowed by his uniform, his helmet, and a wall of identical shields. They are no longer individuals, they have become the movement and the force. When human beings lose their distinct identity, they shed their sense of personal accountability. The boundaries of what they permit themselves to do expand, because the consequences feel like they belong to the crowd rather than the self. Next comes the biological hijack, the primitive downshift. As the physical pressure of the crowd builds, the human brain abandons the prefrontal cortex, the center of logic, and activates the amygdala, the engine of our survival instincts. Analytical thinking stops. Ram is no longer evaluating the nuances of government policy, and Bikram is no longer weighing the proportionality of his response. Their brains are scanning for a single answer: is my group under attack? In this state, an emotion like panic or anger spreads like a virus. This is emotional contagion. When a single stone is thrown from the front line, the action serves as a permission slip. Because others are doing it, the action suddenly feels normal to the rest of the mass. The police line is subject to these exact same forces. They wear identical uniforms, face extreme stress, and operate under high pressure. When a rock strikes a shield or an officer is injured, emotional contagion rips through their ranks just as quickly as it does the protesters. At the peak of chaos, neither side makes conscious, deliberate choices. The individuals have surrendered their agency to the invisible machinery of the swarm. The adrenaline eventually burns out, but the physical reality remains. The crowd's sense of power is fleeting, while the aftermath is permanent. Burned public money, destroyed government records, and hospital corridors filled with the injured. The state bears a uniquely heavy burden. Crowd control requires the restoration of order through the protection of human life. When state forces succumb to the same psychological downshift as the crowd, restraint fails, rubber bullets escalate to live ammunition, and the cost is measured in casualties. The underlying anger of the youth in Nepal was based on genuine suffering, but that anger does not grant a blank check for destruction. A movement can illuminate societal failure, but an uncontrolled swarm will only burn down its own future. Hours later, the streets are empty. Ram sits alone in his hostel room, staring at his hands. Bikram sits in the barracks, unbuckling his gear in silence. Without the crowd's energy, their individual reason returns, leaving both men with a heavy question. Why did I do that? This psychological mechanism serves as an explanation for human vulnerability rather than a moral excuse for violence. It reveals how easily our rational minds can be hijacked by our environment. Civilization frays at the moment an individual decides they no longer need to analyze the evidence because their group has already done the thinking for them. To prevent the next tragedy, we must remain the masters of our own logic. Practice rational discourse. Question the narrative, demand the evidence, and protect your identity from the swarm.